anything that, like, you want to talk about? Like, do you have any structure, or you just want to sort of ad lib?
You had mentioned we should each ask each other like 5 questions or something. So I don't know if it would be kind of cool for you to start for a change. But I do want to say
Yeah, I
that
will.
we have been in cahoots for 4 years, I just realized, because I was looking back on some old emails, and you and I were emailing before there was even a foundation email. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's very cool.
Wow. Well,
Yeah,
it,
I found some stuff from 2019, and I remember I think you had reached out to me. I'm not sure, it might have even been on Instagram. And I saw your email address, Lisa Bella Donna 2600, and like, oh, okay, she's the real
uh-huh.
deal.
Yeah. And that's been
Yeah,
that way for 20. That email's been around for at least 20 years,
that's amazing. That's amazing. First of all, I want to introduce you, though you probably need no introduction because this is on video. I am here with Lisa Bella Donna. It is probably our fourth interview together. And after countless times of chatting and videoing and getting tutored and hanging out and drinking whiskey and playing synthesizers. So it's a pleasure to see you again. And
Great to see you too, my love. Greetings on this
so
day.
your studio looks even better than I remember. Is that new? The wooden part is new, right? Is that part of the
This whole thing behind me, sort of just recently got finally built, I guess. Custom cabinets made by Chad Beverlin, Akron Hardwoods in Akron, Ohio. And it's a year-long project of building all the cabinets. I mean, it goes all the way around. But yeah, it's finally done. So I'm very grateful and very excited because I'm going to kind of try to take some time, and I've kind of put together a rigorous program for myself, and I'm going to just try to take a couple of weeks, 3 to 6 weeks, and really work on this whole thing. The whole signal path, signal flow, see the art of CV interfacing and pattern busing and sequential concepts, and not just melodic sequences and the obvious kinds of things, but essentially creating compositions based on logic with this stuff.
oh,
So I'm excited about it. It's going to be a real awesome way to sort of humble myself and sort of restart, another new chapter of this. And so once I get to a certain point where I feel like I have reached a higher ground, then I'm going to start composing for it.
wow. So you're going to compose for the entire collection. Is this like another generation of a Tonto-esque kind of thing?
Yeah, I would say without a doubt. I mean, it goes, like I said, all the way around.
Oh my goodness.
And I mean, I can't even pan it all the way. And there's a reason for this. Like I said, it's, I would rather spend time composing and patching and refining and weaving fine details of a piece of electronic music than sit at the computer and edit everything down and fix everything. Regardless of it's a recording art, I'm a performing artist. So my way of synthesis is interactive and not just self-generative. But what this allows me is a really crazy range of concept, both in voices. I mean, if I included everything, I don't know how many voices it would be. I mean, the large format is around 46 voices. So
Wow.
that's 46 oscillators, 46 envelope generators. There's
How many filters do you have?
Oh, I would say 24 different filters. Some are custom made for me by Rich Shirkin in Canada.
Is that the multi-mode filter that we use when
That's
we did it?
one of them. Yeah. I also have some other ones recently that he's made. And there's others. There's a lot of different manufacturers in this system. But yeah, I mean, I want to be able to have, complete orchestrative control in the moment, and just be able to send. I have just had some custom Mogami snakes made for all the trunk lines around the room that go to the digital interface, which go out to the mixing desks, tape machines. At any time I could, use a different recorder for a different element. Like I said, it's all about fine detail for me. And that's kind of the plateau I'm trying to get to now. And this combined with the Euro systems that I have, I mean, I don't know. It's a crazy amount of firepower. And it just simply allows me time to refine ideas while I'm still doing other things. There's always a sense of multitask here. So
So it's an organic, but in the moment type of composing rather than CV to MIDI layering from different times. You're doing it on the fly, so to speak. Would that be?
well, I would just say simultaneously, it's made to be able to use, and I can use the computer. The other thing is, if I want to do things that aren't, just the limited aspect of just CV sequencing, which is pretty limitless in itself. But if I want to do things like counterpoint or anything in the computer that I want to do MIDI sequencing, well, then that allows me that much more control. If I had a 4-part invention in the computer, then I could have another 4 channels to do various things. There could be changing sounds per part, different envelopes, different filters. This allows me to sort of quarantine entirely different little synthesizer systems and to trigger them off one at a time or in tandem. I mean, just as a few examples of this, what I have in mind.
Wow.
So I'm excited about it. And, then when it's time to color and to express myself as a lyricist, I just pull up a mini Moog or a 2600 and just play my heart out, and that's what's fun, is to have a whole orchestra of possibility, both musically, psychoacoustically. Also, I need to mention that I am very passionate about Dolby Atmos. And so
yeah.
this is something that will allow me to compose 10 individual channels, all perfectly orchestrated and synchronized for immersive audio. So there's a lot of intention behind this system, other than it just looks cool, which is what most people, I get harassed all the time, but that's okay. It does look cool. So
it's
that's all it's really about then. That's fine. I'm busy though. I'm busy working on a lot of concepts, and have been, for this thing, as it's, this system behind this kind of section behind me sat in boxes for a year, and now it's there. And so I'm just like really starting to get into what's going to happen. It's going to be great.
I know not everybody knows you're a multi-instrumentalist and you've played. I can't think of one genre that you haven't played, unless maybe. No, I can't think of one genre. I mean, you talked to me about Bach and Brookshild, and you've talked to me about gospel and jazz and heavy metal and punk and class. It's so the whole gamut. But you had origins in other music before you got to this place. So can we do just a very, very brief overview of that? because I find it
Absolutely.
fascinating. I can never hear enough of it.
Sure. Well, as you know, I'm originally from Cleveland, Ohio. And when I grew up there, my aunt and her daughter were very vocal. And they were very important in turning me on to music and just experiencing music in their home. You know, Doris was a country and Western musician who played many instruments herself and was very talented and very sweet. And her daughter, this would have been in the early mid 70s. She was a high school teenager and listened to hard rock of the era and would babysit me a lot and take me around with her. And I would go to all sorts of live music. I don't recall what it was, but she did take me to a Aerosmith sound check in the early mid 70s. It's probably been 75, maybe 76, before they were really a household name. And that was an amazing experience. Between that and she played Black Sabbath, and she had a really great taste in music for that time. So that was where it began, and then that was it. I was obsessed with music. My parents listened to a lot of great music when they were together, a lot of R&B music and more funk oriented things. They liked rock and things, but they liked Average White Band and Al Green and Three Dog Night and all that kind of stuff. Fast forward to I'd say I was nine years old. My mom remarried to this gentleman who had an amazing eclectic taste in music, and he turned me on to so much heavy stuff. I mean, weekends there would just be amazing afternoons of listening to records and doing calligraphy and learning charcoal sketching, and he was very artist centric. I mean, he was also a gardener and a fisherman and did lots of those kinds of things too. But I was very attracted to his, he had a very natural passion for all those things. And he turned me on to Bach, Shostakovich, Miles Davis, Bob Dylan, Wendy Carlos, XTC, Adam and the Ants, 999, Vandergraaf Generator. I mean, it just goes on and on, and he was never like, he wasn't into, he did like Black Sabbath and certain things, but he did not like, he was very selective, and he wouldn't like ever deter the music that I liked, because this is the turn of the 80s, and so I was getting into some of the things that were happening, but he would just be like, well, there's also this, check this out, you seem attracted to this sort of music, so try this out. And he was just always very kind about it. When him and my mom split, he gave me his entire record collection.
Whoa, is that what you have in your living room?
I still have about half of it left. I mean, sadly, I went through some pretty hard times and moved hundreds of times. Before I even graduated high school, I moved hundreds of times. And so I lost about half of them, but I still have albums of his that have his name on the top that I just, I'd fight to the death to keep them, so he had a real big impact on my appreciation of music and awareness of music,
Yeah, it sounds magical. Reflecting back on what you were saying about calligraphy, there's another connection we have there I didn't know about.
Oh yeah, I was a calligraphist. I did this is back in the 80s. I did calligraphy for my school's yearbooks.
David Friend's wife is a calligraphist, and she's a world famous calligraphist.
Really? That's amazing.
Yeah, and she's the one who did all the graphics for ARP in the early days.
No kidding.
She did all the hand drawings that you see on the early manuals and materials and stuff like that. was all Margaret Shepherd. And I was so impressed with what she did that years later, I asked her to give me some calligraphy lessons. And then I went on and studied that when I went to art school. So
Yeah. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. I wanted to ask you about your art and your photography and some of your artistic history of Dina Pearlman. So
okay.
how about it? Give us a little bit of give us a little bit of Dina Pearlman's history. What really got you passionate about art and photography, and we'll put music at the end of that. But please.
Yeah, well, it was family inspired in a couple of different ways. My father was an avid photographer. At one point, he took classes in photography. He had made some beautiful portraits of my mom, beautiful romantic portraits. You could really see how he had been so taken with her, which is really, really delightful, but also very artistic black and whites. And this is a hobby that he had since he was in high school. They had a dark room at one of the places that he lived with his grandparents. His father left when he was 4. So he's basically brought up with a single mom and her parents, and they built a darkroom at one point, him and his brother. So he had an ongoing passion for photography, and you'll see a lot of photographs of him with tons of cameras around his neck when we travel, and they kind of look like his own paparazzi and all. And so there was the aspect of photography for documentation. And when I went to art school, I was always drawing, and I loved, again, what Margaret Shepherd had done, and I would make cartoons and draw and create my own type styles and things like that. And when I went to art school, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I thought I would go in for painting because I didn't know what else to do. And then my mom said, no, you have to have a profession. You should go in for graphic design. And I went in for graphic design, and I took calligraphy as an elective. And during that time, I took an elective also in photography. And I did so well that they put me in the honors class. I was the only freshman that went into the honors class. And I won an award, and I really, really took off. I loved photography. And I would walk around places all by myself, stuff that, thinking in the past was probably not the best idea to do, a tiny little girl walking around with a camera, and like any neighborhood, I'd get off at the side of the road and take pictures. But I was fearless. I was young and silly. And so I just fell in love with photography. It was around the same time that I was also involved in music and playing in bands. I was very serious about the two of them, and I was sort of juggling what to do. As a matter of fact, I finished my degree at Emerson College with a minor photography, and I studied jazz piano there and dance. And I used to say I specialized in taking college courses and things that would never make me any money. I started moving back into abstraction and started moving into working on paper. With these photographs, I would do mixed media, and it kind of brought me full circle. And I spent about 15 years in the 2000s working in printmaking and mixed media and encaustic painting, which is painting with a wax pigment.
Yeah.
So
that's amazing, Dina.
And I've recently decided to start getting serious about my own work again.
Yeah, I would sure love to see more of your work in that regard,
And you will. I'm going to be starting to put that stuff back online, and again get back into some of my own work. I would be remiss without speaking about my mother's side of the family. My uncle, Albert Alkali, was a very highly regarded artist, working primarily in abstract or abstract expressionism. And he studied in Europe. As a matter of fact, I believe that he studied at Bauhaus for a very short period of time before the Second World War. He started the Carpenter Center for the Visual Arts at Harvard University with Walter Gropius. And he had a Guggenheim grant and had vast collectors, and it was an extremely accomplished artist. And he was,
Wow.
I used to say that the two most influential people, two most influential men in my life was my uncle Albert and my father Alan. And Albert really took me under his wing and encouraged me to flourish. And I loved his work. I still love his work very much. And he continues to be an influence on me. He was also a very strong person. He fought in the Yugoslav army against Nazis, even though he was Jewish, and risked even more challenges if he was caught as a prisoner of war, which he was. And he has an amazing survival story, just absolutely fascinating. So, you know,
Wow.
the idea of standing on the shoulders of these giants that came before you is so much of a theme in my life. And I'm so grateful for the people that have come before me. And I'm sure you can relate, you know, these characters. And I mean, I don't mean characters as in oddball. I mean characters as the characters in the movie of your life, so to speak, are
Absolutely.
so important. And I think it's so important to honor the ancestors and elders, which is actually why the last piece that you did for to perform for me, that's on the CD, to me it had essences or elements of a lot of what we discussed, artists and the like. And so it made me think about how we pass on a baton when we're expressing ourselves, be it music or visual arts.
Absolutely. And I love that title, by the way, that you gave that piece, because that is what I was trying to channel, is very much that spirit. You know, getting to know you over the last 4 years, and, you know, and slowly but surely hearing, you know, a lot about your amazing family, in the history in your family it's very special and very remarkable. And yeah, you should be proud. I mean, it's, you know, it's just, you need to write a book at some point.
I do. I am so proud. You know, last night I was watching TV with my husband, and I blinked, and all of a sudden he said, "Look what's on," and it was Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And
Really?
right, yeah. I mean, literally, he like, "Look what's on," and there's Phil Dodds and the 2500 and the whole, you know, that the sort of the climax
Yeah.
of the movie, the final scene. And you know, I fell. I'm like, goodness.
Yeah, that's
It
amazing.
never gets old, Lisa. It never gets old. I cry sometimes when I hear music, understanding that my father had a part of it, and how it's brought people together. You know, this whole process has also brought people together in their commonality of loving, you know, the tools that are used, the instruments that are used for expression. It never gets old.
No, I'm sure it doesn't, and it shouldn't. You know, I mean, I know that we're close as friends at this point, but there's still times that it kind of blows my mind, you know, because coming up with a pair of 2600s, I mean, it was my life for, oh, 15 years easy, where I wasn't even interested in it, anyone knowing about it or not, because there was no interest in that sort of thing in that era of the 90s, the late 80s into the 90s. Nobody cared. But I was so amazed by your dad's work. And the more that I would just dig in and discover and try different things and combine things and record these, these sort of, primitive yet elaborate compositions. I always dreamed of getting to meet your dad and to tell him how important he was in my own development with electronic music. And psychoacoustic awareness, is one of the things that I don't think gets mentioned enough. Like they're in any chosen environment. It's one thing to be able to touch a listener with a great musical and harmonic development or rhythmic development, chordal development, things that are, familiar in the Western world of music. But with the 2600, I found this whole gateway. Like, it's like having a house in your home of music that you didn't know was there. And it just opened up this a remarkable passage for me to combine those elements of things that make you feel a certain way. And you might not be able to recognize what those sounds actually are, but my intentions have always been to make a home for my listeners in the wilderness of my muse. I want them to feel safe, yet in these wild,
but not too safe, I hope.
Yeah, safe safe to get wild, in these crazy environments that I would try to project and to unfold in a piece, and of course everyone knows me as a huge Moog synthesizer user, and I am that too.
Yep.
But it was in the beginning that I discovered these things through your dad's work, especially the 2600s in particular, because just combining them with the other ARPs that I had, there was a long period of time that I didn't even realize that they could be controlled together until I eventually got the ARP 2600 user's manual. Because, this was before YouTube. This was before there was everything available to you. It was really hard to find any information about it. And my colleagues they just thought I was nuts. They're like, why in the world would you spend money on this stuff? Until I started bringing them mixes of my albums. And they were like, you did that on that pile of junk in there? I'm like, Then they started being a little more supportive and answering some questions and helping me navigate these sort of mystical, beautiful systems. But to think about your dad again, and to think about coming up with the integrated system that is the 2600, or the Odyssey for that matter, and the 2500, is some fruitful gardens of a beautiful mind, and I've always he's one of my idols of this earth for sure, as is Bob. Him and Bob to me are, those are the fathers of this thing. I've done many sessions where all I had was an Odyssey or in a mini Moog. The Odyssey, you could have some sort of chordal development and then have a lead interval on the mini Moog. The mini Moog does have 3 oscillators where the Odyssey has 2. So there's various things you can do with that concept. There's just a different timbre per each. As a solo synthesizer, a mini Moog just is like, just cuts through anything. It just has this, sound that is as real as, a flugelhorn or a cello or a violin. You have this really strong, natural sounding tone. And with the ARPs, you have an almost more vocal tone, an almost you know, the way that you can sort of use the pulse width modulation, and the way that you can use the sync, and the way that it interacts with itself allows you to have this very vocal like tone. Okay, going into a whole other sort of idea, you know, the ARPs are really fast for pulling up and developing psychoacoustic tones, spacey sounds in layman's. You know, you have your sample and hold, you can attenuate things with the sort of bipolar modulation that the ARPs provide. And, you know, not really a lot of other systems do that like an ARP does, where you can have something being modulated and then attenuate that again with another function. And so that's a real brilliant part of the ARPs I love. And it has everything to do with creating realism in your sounds. And I don't want that to be mistaken for just trying to recreate sounds that exist, but it's about having the realism of constant movement and development in a sound. And the ARPs allow you to do that in a way that's very unique to themselves. I love combining the 2600s with the Moog modular, especially the 960 sequencers, which there's a row of 4 of them over here in this corner. And I also have the ARP sequencers as well. But there's something about using the 960 with a 2600 that allows for just amazing possibilities. The difference between a Moog 960 sequencer and a ARP 1601 sequencer is that with the Moogs, you have an individual output for every gate. And so this allows to control things in different ways and different times. You could trigger an envelope, you can trigger a multitude of things in different ways. Than with the ARP, you have 3 different gates as opposed to 16 gates out, which also does other combinations that are unique. So depending on whether you are attenuating pitch, or you're attenuating filters, or triggering envelopes, it does it in a different style. It's like the difference between a great rock drummer and a great jazz drummer. They're both important, and they both hit you in different parts of your body, you know? And I feel that way about the uniqueness of each thing as a modular source. So
non-synthesizer albums that you feel influence your work today?
I would say one of the most important albums that influenced my work directly is George Crumb's Ancient Voices of Children from 1971. So when I was in college, I had this professor who was, you know, really, really sweet, and used to tolerate me correcting him in class about the classical periods, because at that time I was absolutely obsessed with classical music and classical music history, and I was very sharp about it. And so there would be times he would goof on a few things, and I would just very politely put my hand up, you know, and he eventually got tired of it. You know, he was just like, who is this kid? One day he said, you know, Lisa, I need you to stay after class. I'm like, oh, here, I did it finally. You know, finally pissed this guy off. And he asked, do you have an hour or so of time? I'm like, you sure? What's going on? And he's like, I want you to see something that I don't think that you've been exposed to, because I've never heard you really talk about or correct me on anything in the 20th century period. I was like, no, I haven't really made it there so much. So he brings out the 16 millimeter projector and hooks it up into the stereo of the class, which he had a good stereo. I don't remember what it was, but it sounded great.
Uh-huh.
He played me the premiere of Ancient Voices of Children, first concert. I don't know where he got this. I mean, I know that our library in West Virginia you could go and rent 16 millimeter prints of things.
Wow.
Everything, films, classic films to lectures. And I went through a long period of, I got into that later on, to just discovering stuff. And that thing blew my mind. There was just something about it. The whole range of everything, the arrangement, the space, the air, the oxygen. I thought, how in the world could I ever create music like that? I'm not going to have, and back then I tried to get grants and tried to do things and write small chamber pieces and, pieces for chamber orchestra and synthesizer, and, I just got laughed at at that time. And that album was really the reason that I tried to discover some sort of modular synthesizer, because when I played that album, eventually found a copy and played it to my peers. And I asked them that question. I was like, how could I do this and not have to have a human orchestra?
Right.
They were just like, probably a modular synthesizer, because you could immediately access that range. And that is what led me to the 2600. It's one of the many things. So that album for sure.
Wow. Okay. It's one that I never heard of before you. So like I said, when I went to see you going to school in a good way.
I didn't need drugs. The thing is, like, I was so straight-laced and so boring, but hearing that album just put me on a path of just really deep music living. I just lived in that space of music. I kind of, for a while, it kind of just like I left everything else behind, other than what I had to do to make a living with music, but any free time I had, I could not wait. I was just could not wait to get home and work on finding these things, these details, these atmospheres, these wildernesses, these landscapes of sound. In, I still get goosebumps just thinking about it, even all these years later. Just it's pretty amazing how art has that timeless effect on us as humans. Beautiful stuff. What about yourself? What's an album or a piece of music that really knocked you out early on, Dina Boo?
Yeah. It's interesting because I had a lot of exposure in my house to classical music. That was my father's go-to and favorite, and that was what he played on the piano, and that is what I heard. I vividly remember hearing Headhunters for the first time when I was an early teenager, and it was, I didn't understand it, but it was interesting, and I found it fascinating that there was coming out of speakers out of my house, because I pretty much only heard classical. The other, and this is gonna bring a big laugh. I mean, this is music that I just hit me over the head, not necessarily that I wanted to emulate it or that I loved it, but was just like nothing I'd ever heard and stuck with me. So Gershon Kingsley.
Okay, awesome.
I just remember hearing this around the house and just thinking, this is crazy fun. What is this? I've never heard such a thing. This is crazy. And I was fascinated by it. And yeah, so early exposure to music like that. When I started to get my own tastes in music, probably what I listened to more than anything was Pink Floyd.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, yeah.
Which
The
record?
Wish You Were Here
Okay.
a lot. I mean, of course, Dark Side of the Moon, it was the 50th anniversary of it a week ago or something like that. And I remember vividly when it came out. I didn't have my own copy until I was probably about 15. But I remember hearing it on the radio, not quite understanding it. Um, but when I was a teenager and I started, hanging out in my room and closing the door and listening to music, lying on the bed, staring at the ceiling and closing my eyes, and that kind of that immersion that happens when you're a teenager. That was one of the albums that was so I kind of it was a couple of years back that I discovered them. In other words, I was a little bit late. Led Zeppelin, big time. And
Yep.
I loved Led Zeppelin so much, and I loved the longer pieces. And Kashmir blew me away. I remember Kashmir
Really,
just, you know, um,
nothing like it.
nothing
None
like it.
of their contemporaries sounded like them.
It was so different, and yeah, maybe it resonated because it has an orchestral quality to it, aspect to it. You know, but I spent probably from when I was gosh, 14 till I was 18, just locked in either first my room, and then I had this basement I've spoken about a lot, which had the art posters on the wall and everything like that. Just listening over and over again to music, music, music. Deep Purple. Deep Purple was another one.
Yeah, that was one of my firsts right off the bat. I remember sneaking up in the middle of the night at age 3 or 4 to quietly put on the headphones and pop in my dad's 8-track of Machine Head without waking anybody up, and just getting lost in that intro to Lazy
Yeah.
just blew my mind. I mean, that's one of the first like epiphanies is listening to that album. And then I would pass out and fall asleep with the tape looping, and then dad would get up and raise hell at me. Where'd up my tapes? So he made me my own mixtapes with all of the favorite stuff out of his collection. So, because he knew he wasn't going to stop me from it.
Well, then
But
there's this one. Hold on. It's right here, actually.
oh yeah,
Oh my God. That's another one when I had never heard anything like Bob O'Reilly before in my life. It was this entire album, I know every word, every nuance, every stop, every go. But again, the sort of vastness, Bob O'Reilly and Kashmir, but they both have this, if you feel like you're flying, this was before drones, but flying in something like a low plane over vast oceans and mountains. There was this spaciousness, which I found, which in retrospect, thinking about the ability to be spacious at the same time intricate and complex, and that kind of goes full circle to the kind of stuff that you were talking about earlier, what you would like to do.
I grew up with all of those Who records, and played in tons of cover bands that played the Who music, and they're just in my fabric as well.
What what albums would you suggest someone a young person who hasn't been exposed to music from the past listen to?
Miles Davis, Bitches Brew. That's it. That's the one. Sit down between the speakers. If it's a nice day, open all the windows in your house and listen to that record in between the stereo speakers. And that's another big one for me, is that record. I
Bitches
mean,
Brew.
Oh yeah, it was just another one of those milestone records. You know, it just I'll never forget hearing it for the first time. It just blew my mind, and I'd never heard music like that before. Not like that, not done that way. You know, my mother had a dear friend named Karen Flowers, and Karen was very quiet, uh, beautiful woman, brown eyes, kind of a heavy vibe. You know, she just was, she dressed a little more conservative than my mom's group of jeans and t-shirts and all that. And she was really supportive of my crazy passion and obsession for music. And I'm trying to think how old I was then, probably 12 or 13 maybe. And so I'm in my room on some summer day. It's 103 fucking degrees up there. And I'm just sitting in my room listening to whatever I was listening to. And there's a knock on my door. And I open it up and it's Karen. I'm just like, hi, Karen, you know, twinkle, twinkle, twinkle. I had the hots for Karen, just in case you couldn't tell. And she's like, hey, I got something for you. I'm like, oh, yeah. And I know this is kind of not cool, but, you know, I survived. She's like, I got something I want you to listen to. I'm like, okay. And she would occasionally bring up albums, you know, other cool albums, but more, not anything quite this esoteric. And she knew it was hot as hell up in my room. So she's like, here is 2 ice cold Michelobes. And this is Miles Davis, Bitches Brew. You know, and it's 2 LPs, long LPs. She's like, I want you to drink these beers, and I just want you to sit in your room in between the speakers and listen to this album. And, you know, being as young as I was, and I didn't really do anything like that, the beers, you know, ripped me right away and cooled me down. And the music just blew my mind. I couldn't even move. I was in such of a all of the music and the panning of the trumpet and the tape echo and just the way that that music comes off is it just feels like it goes on forever and you don't want it to end. You know, when the side does end, you're like, oh. And so you can't wait to flip the next side that's almost 30 minutes a piece. Karen Flowers. Yeah. Bitches Brew, Miles Davis. That's the one I would say for young kids that if they're not familiar with that kind of that era of music so much, that's the one, you know. Especially since everybody listens to loop-based music now. I mean, that's one of the first albums of groove-based hip, you know, loops. There's a lot of loops on that album. Hadn't been done like that yet, not with that kind of music. You know, I could only imagine Columbia Records when he handed that thing in, they were just like, what are we going to do with this? You know, but Miles was, as much as, you know, if you've ever read Miles Davis's autobiography with
Oh,
Quincy
yes.
Pope,
Yeah.
there's things in that book that are hard to read about a
Yes.
musical hero, but you can't deny that he was one of the bravest musicians who accepted full responsibility for every change in his whole career. And he just did it again and again over up until his passing.
And not only that, he out of his out of his groups came some amazing musicians as well, you know.
Yeah, everybody.
Hancock, Wayne Shorter, everybody, right? So,
Everybody.
you know, think of, yeah, it's pretty amazing the music, I was thinking about trying to figure out other music that affected me, you know, when I go into, because I was speaking mostly about the 70s, and, you know, the 80s was a time where I actually started playing music. I was very, very moved by punk. I love the energy. It gave formation to emotions that I wasn't sure how to handle. And being someone who was into dance and movement, I really loved the way it just inspired one to be moving. You know, it was like relentless, and I really loved that. And then the other flip side, I started, you know, in the later 80s and early 90s. I remember getting into like trip hop and was interested in a lot of, you know, bands, and at the time not even thinking about how electronic music was part of it. You know, like I love Portishead. You know, I didn't think about how electronic music was part of it. I had forgotten about synthesizers by then. You know, so, you know, going back and hearing that, and then understanding the context.
And that's a nice, you know, that's an amazing eclectic mix of things, you know, that you're into.
I love music. I love being part of it. I love hearing it. I love making it. And I love the opportunity to hear new bands. I really love the philosophy behind Bandcamp, for instance. I love that there is a venue for people to publish, to self-publish, and that there's a supportive community, and that, you know, famous artists are publishing their stuff there too. I mean, Peter Gabriel, you know, Pharoah Sanders. I mean, all these artists that are on Bandcamp, which is amazing. They're, you know, they're saying, yeah, this it should
It's
be
a great, it's a great,
democratic. It should.
yeah, I love going to the mainframe page of Bandcamp, and you know, anything that, I mean, they have what I would call a positive algorithm, you know, depending
Yes.
on what you're into and who you follow and the sort of mixture of things that you either purchase or follow. They give great recommendations and great news and interviews. I mean, I was grateful to be featured in there a couple of times, and they do great interviews on artists, both, you know, of course, popular artists as well as obscure artists. And I
Yeah.
think that's what's missing in the main music scene now.
Yes.
That eclecticness has just been, it's been kicked out, and Bandcamp is one of the few places that you can get a really great, an amazing wealth of different kinds of music from now and different eras, things that have been found, you know, African funk to, you know, Korean electronic music. I mean, it's just, you know, that's amazing that that interface is there.
So we spoke about musical artists that were not synthesizer artists. Maybe speak about a few people that are doing things now that you're enjoying.
Now, one of my favorite modern electronic musicians, and it's more electroacoustic, and that is Natasha Barrett. And I think what she does is remarkable, and is keeping, has been keeping that kind of music alive and well for quite some time now. Actually, she's just been so under the radar that, you know, it's hard to, you know, it's kind of hard to find her stuff. But now she did have a great run of CDs on a label called Electro CD, and they were sort of keeping the defenders of the faith of what I call pure electronic music, not just fashion electronic music. And there's no right or wrongs. It's just a matter of personal taste. And yeah, Natasha Barrett is a favorite that I love to listen to, and I consider her an inspiration. She's inspired me greatly to continue to follow the path, and she does some remarkable installation work. She has an abundance of thesis and other writing available on her website that is just, you know, should be discovered. So yeah, she's one for sure. How about yourself?
I could think of, my latest, who I'm listening to a lot lately on Bandcamp is Chris Meyer. He's
Okay.
He puts voices in sometimes.
Oh, okay.
Voices
Awesome.
in, and other instruments. There's elements of indigenous music intertwined with electronic modular synthesis. So, it's really original, really interesting. And,
Awesome. I'll check them out.
and
Chris Meyer.
some of it is some Chris Myers. Yeah, some of it's very some of it can be edgy, and it can be relaxing at the so there's different spectrums, like yours as well. Sometimes yours is really edgy, sometimes yours is really, it's like just a big exhale, and sometimes you're on a journey. And so I think you would enjoy his work as well. Yeah. So you just recently had a studio overhaul. Can we see your studio?
Sure. Okay, so I'll do my best to get everything in a shot. Let's see here. This is kind of where it starts. Yeah, okay, it's about as far as it'll go. But this basically comes around. It's a series of different manufacturers, tons of different manufacturers, and some custom built modules. I'm in the process of having 4 more custom built modules coming soon. There's some cool old stuff in there that I've been able to get a hold of via some colleagues from many years. And of course, I'm huge lover of Moog synthesizers, and I work with Moog synthesizers extensively, who I love, and they just sound so good. They always work with every mix, every project. I'm a big lover of the Hologram company, and their microcosm is amazing and just is the perfect sort of, it's kind of like a phrase recorder that sort of manipulates anything you put into it and just creates these beautiful weaves of color and texture and tone. So it goes up and up and up.
Look at that.
So up top here is the Antonis sequencer.
Yes.
Which I love. And then here is my mothership, which is in the videos that I do with Moog synthesizers. Next to her is my original 2600 that I bought back in the 80s. And, the story goes, I sold my car and
Yeah, it's such a great story.
hitchhiked to go get her. And then, yeah, the large format modular just goes around and around. There's, let's see here. And then I'm recently doing a project where I'm using the 2600 and the string ensemble. So that's a new full-size Korg modular 2600. I can't even talk. Full-size Korg ARP 2600, and it sounds great. It's built like a tank, and it was really unexpectedly breathtaking experience unpacking that. It comes in this touring case and has an amazing version of the 3620 keyboard, duophonic keyboard. It plays like a dream. Yeah, it's I feel very grateful to have it. It was just a very fortunate experience thanks to Korg. And underneath is my original ARP Odyssey from way back in the day. And I recently just had it fully refurbished by Peter Foley Electronics in Cincinnati. And he's done a lot of great servicing as well as custom work. He is the one that helped me put together the mothership, the Moog mothership that has 8 Mother 32s, 2 DFAMs, and 2 subharmonicons, and then it comes on with a tandem power supply and has 12 trunk lines on the back. Behind the 2600 is one of my favorite instruments of all time, and that's the Moog 3P modular. There's just nothing sounds like that thing. That combined with the vintage 2600 is pretty much where it's at. And then my vintage ARP string ensemble, which has been with me from the beginning. It's just always there, always on the records. It's great shape. So yeah, I love it. I love the ARP string ensemble. To me, it is what I call the sky machine. Anytime that you put it in a track, it just opens the light and the color of any track. It's just such a great instrument. And then this is one of my Euro systems that is kind of also a lot of times I can't talk. Also, a lot of times my live system, and it has a series of Moog modulars, some Dope filters, AJH filters, which I love, a Blue Lantern clock divider, just a wide variety of things. There's spring reverb, sequential switches, and then the Korg 2600 Mini that is awesome to take on the road because you can throw it in its own suitcase and it just picks up and goes. I have a whole other room that has another modular with the 2 vintage ARP sequencers, more Moog and Dope for stuff. Fender Rhodes, Mellotron, ARP Omni, Moog Voyager, Moog 1. You know, it just goes on and on and on. So this room isn't big enough to house everything. So this is kind of like, you know, the main modular room. And that's why I have workbenches all the way around. So when I'm doing sessions and I'm composing, I can just throw something in if I want to have a specific, you know, additional instrument. So it works out pretty well. But yeah, I'm very grateful. It's taken all my life to put this together. So I'm excited for this next chapter. That's just now beginning, really. It's just now beginning. I'm just now getting this thing to where it's streamlined and it's easy to compose and to realize some of the stuff going on in my head.
Wow. Pretty awesome.
Yeah, and there's tape machines everywhere, and I use a Universal Audio Apollo 16. I have a custom, sort of a customized Allen and Heath 32 by 8 mixer. I have SSL stuff, Uri stuff, old spring reverbs, old compressors, DBX stuff. You know, I have a whole rack of things down here. I do a lot of mixing to tape machines and cassette decks, and then I fly those things into the computer and combine everything. And like I said, it's all, you know, just fine tuning, fine details. I love VSTs. I use Cherry Audio stuff, Moog VSTs, which I do a lot of content, and I do a lot of work with Moog's VSTs and do a lot of their presets and things like that. Slate Nash, Teletone Audio. It just goes on. Waves Audio. I do a lot of work with Waves Audio now, and they're an amazing team of people to work with, and remarkable plugins. Plug Alliance is making some amazing stuff. I mean, just, the detail of where things are going in the digital world is finally catching up, So, Dina Pearlman, let's see your studio, dear.
Sure. So I share my studio with my husband, and this is when people come and stay over, that are coming over to do foundation work, this is where they get to hang. So this is actually, which it's interesting, if you could see the Nexus sign behind me. Nexus, the company that my dad worked at, where he made op amps. So it's
okay.
And I found two vanity plates in his stuff, just a couple of years ago, and it's a Korg full size.
Beautiful, all patched up, ready to play.
Yeah.
That's how we like to see it.
And then I have it's not hooked into the amp, but this is our Korg ARP Odyssey.
Okay.
I have an M Audio keyboard as well, because of this. It's got a more full-size keyboard, so I can use it with the Odyssey. I can use it with a VST. So yeah. I have my father's Pro Soloist down at the bottom, and that was refurbished. It's beautifully refurbished by Allison Stout in Pennsylvania.
That's amazing.
She works with MEAP. I love it. That was my instrument when I was a little girl. That was the one I loved.
That's so remarkable.
Yeah, and then the top two instruments, unfortunately, need to have a little bit of love and care. There's a Explorer,
Okay.
They're pretty rare. I don't see a lot of those around.
They sound great.
They sound great. And then a mixer on the top.
Yeah, the minus noise mixer.
Yeah. So both of these, they're in line to go and get a little bit of a makeover, kind of thing.
I need to do that with my I'd like to have my minus noise mixer routed for stereo. And mine was given to me in my early 20s. I still have it.
This is Ruperto's Corner. These drums he basically put together. So he made them. So they're really beautiful.
Okay, awesome.
They're all custom. Most the cymbals are Zildjian. And we have a lot of artwork here for inspiration. We got Miles and John Coltrane. Upstairs, I have my dad's baby grand, or actually it's a full grand, but it's the smallest grand they have that's considered a full.
Okay.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's like 5.5 feet long. It's not that big, but it's beautiful. And the kind of cool thing was, it was made the same year that he was born. So it was made in 1925.
Really?
And it's ebony, but it wasn't ebony at the time. It was I think it was mahogany, and then it got mid-century, right around the time we moved to the house from the apartment that I grew up in to the house I grew up in the early 60s. He bought this refurbished Steinway. So it was refurbished right around the time I was a kid. So it's sort of a generational piano. And then I have a Korg ARP 2600 Mini that sits at my desk all the time. So I'll sit there, I'll put it on, it'll gurgle and burble, and I'll be doing some work on the computer, and then I'll turn around, get some inspiration, and it's a really nice spot because outside there's a window with birds and a bird feeder, and so I can look outside and see the birds. Which
that's awesome.
Yeah, my dad loved birds.
I love taking it outside.
My husband loves birds.
What are some favorite aspects of your father's work that's really stayed with you, inspired you?
People-oriented products, people-oriented instruments. The concept of making something that's ergonomically viable, so easy for a person to manipulate. The idea of sliders where you can visibly see the levels at a glance, where the diagrams put right on the front panel. So the idea that it shouldn't be a mystery to be able to use it. Granted, most people, when they go up to a 2600, not knowing what to do, and if none of the sliders are, if there's no amplitude or there's no oscillators open, they press a key and they're like, what's going on? You know, so there's always a learning curve, but the learning curve I find is pretty, it's not so steep. Once you get it, you get it. At the same point, there's a lifetime of possibilities. So where things can seem simple and primitive in some ways, there are aspects to the modular and semi-modular, especially, of an infinitesimal amount of sounds that can come out. So he develops something that is people-friendly, but as wide open as the universe to explore. And that's becoming more and more evident the more I learn about his work. The other is that kindness and sharing with people and giving people opportunities is an obligation that we have for our species to pass it on. My dad was, and I speak of this often, but I can't say it enough, was extremely generous spirited. He would give people opportunities. He would lend people or give people instruments. He would give people opportunities. This was extremely important to him. This is how he brought me up. This is how he taught me to be for others. This is how he was and led by example. I am constantly meeting people who knew my dad and will tell me he was just a kind, gentle soul. And one of the things I hope the foundation does is continue the spirit of mentorship and continue the spirit of providing opportunity, because I can't think of a better way to celebrate his life and to continue in the tradition of music making. There's one more thing I do want to discuss too, which a lot of people don't know, and I'm in the process of sort of figuring out how to integrate this with the foundation's future projects. My dad was an engineer, and my dad was a musician and a music lover. He combined these things, but he was also a humanist and a futurist and extremely concerned with where our world is going.
Boy.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know. Focusing primarily on environmentalism, fearing for climate change and what it could do, he would be not surprised by what's going on right now with the whole aspect of severe weather and climate change. He predicted it. He followed scientists that predicted it. He was a big proponent of Al Gore's philosophies, and it's kind of poignant, this is where I'm going with this, that the older ARPs used op amps, which were produced originally for another technology. These
Okay.
and the matrix switches were created for other technologies. And the idea that you could repurpose stuff that was made for the NASA program, stuff that was made for military, even the idea that you could repurpose stuff to create other things is upcycling may be an oversimplistic way to discuss it, but there's a beauty to that in using resources that we have and materials we have to make more musical instruments, or perhaps to make machines, contraptions, tools that are less harmful for the environment and that can help the environment. So I'm really intrigued by where these possibilities could go. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's something that we all better start to consider.
Yeah.
I mean, we're already past due, you know. I mean, this has been happening for years, decades at this point. And here we are, you know, now we're all children of a new age, you know, truly. Yeah, I mean, I remember kind of saying that whenever the pandemic happened, you know, it started, should I say. It's still happening, really. But we're all children of a very new age, and it's time to heed that call. I mean, it's, you know, I don't know why that we're in this retroactive state of just not embracing the possibilities of the future, both good and bad, you know. But anything like that that takes sacrifice and commitment, you know, aren't usually accepted with open arms, you know. So
we have to be really careful. We're at a point which my dad would call the tipping point, which is based on a book, which the theory is it's kind of like the last straw, the straw that broke the camel's back. You get to a point where things are accumulating and accumulating, and we're kind of riding the status quo. And then there could be one event that completely breaks that and changes it and puts us into catastrophe. So if we're in potentiality for catastrophe, if we don't pay attention, we could hit that tipping point. And that's pretty frightening, because I feel like we're on the cusp of that. On the other side, history has shown that there's periods of enlightenment and then darkness, and it fluctuates. There is no straight line. And this is yet another thing that I learned at the proverbial dinner table when we would discuss everything. The idea that history is cyclical, and that a lot of us, many of us feel that we're on a brink of a dark time. But if it doesn't tip in that direction, wonderful. But if it does, things are going to come back. You know, I think humans are basically good, and my dad believed in that as well. And I think that if we keep believing that and try to focus on the positive without having our head stuck in the sand, then everything's going to be okay.
We just need to try to work together, save our planet. You know, that's the thing, is it doesn't matter what your views are. If our health and the health of our planet is jeopardized, then everybody suffers, you know, regardless of the differences and the divisions and all of those luxuries. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And let's hope that we can, in the great words of Cecil Taylor, hopefully we don't destroy it all. I mean, that kept me driven. When I came back from that experience, I was so driven to just better myself as a player, better myself as a synthesist, as a recording artist, as an engineer. It just, you know, Joe was just so full of life and fire and inspiration and ego and all the stuff, and grace and sweetness. Just do it right or don't do it, you know? That was really it. And his exact words to me were, the real shit is underground. Fuck anything above it. Because that's not where the nitty gritty is. His exact words to me.
Wow.
That was my parting words with Joe Zominal. So
Right.
I've tried to stay underground as possible.
In your subterranean synth cave.
Yeah, my little synth cottage. Dina Pearlman, I love you, my friend.
Thank you for everything. This has been
Likewise.
wonderful. And
let's do this again.
We'll have to do this again soon. All right.
Well, Dina,
I think we did it.
I love you.
Love you too.
Come back soon.
I will. We have another album to make.
Yeah, we do.